Good afternoon and welcome to the Regulators and Policymakers Retreat. This is the 11th edition of the event that we are having here at Goa, the Fort Aguada Beach Resort. And with me towards the end of a brilliant first session that we've had, we have Dr. Surjit Bhalla, who is the chairman of Oxus Investments. Dr. Bhalla, we'd like to know, sir, there is one continent in the whole world, right, as economic history shows, which has managed to colonize another continent. It has managed to enslave one more continent, and in the continent of America, that is really over on that continent. It has settled a penal colony in Australia. Is there really something about this one continent that has made it so rich and so powerful?
Well, you're talking about the US. And, you know, it's a long history as to why it became the way it has and why it has, if you will, outdistanced even Europe. I don't think it's dominating the world, though it is the hegemonic power today. It is not really comparable to the colonialism type of power that was exercised by Europe. One answer to why America has succeeded economically, which gives it its political power, is that has been and still is the most open society. The American Constitution, at least in my mind, is one of the most brilliant documents ever written. And we have to remind ourselves that was written in 1776, and that was the vision of how society should be. It doesn't mean, obviously, that they had the perfect solution, but given the very few amendments that the American Constitution had, and the fact that other constitutions have followed it, and some of our constitutions should have followed it a bit more, in my view, suggests that there was something to the openness of that society, and which has, always welcomed migrants. They had the race problems. Now you've got a black person as a president of the United States. So I think the American model of openness and growth is something that has allowed it to gain immense economic power. Unfortunately, and that's my view, it has also led it for some military interventions that are rather reprehensible, starting from Vietnam and now Iraq. So it isn't that this power has been used correctly. It has been misused, and in the military sense. But now the world has changed, and what we saw in Vietnam when the mighty US got defeated, and what we are seeing in Iraq, that the mighty US doesn't have that much influence in terms of determining the course of history, and what we're seeing in Afghanistan, that might alone is not right. So I think there are a lot more checks and balances in the world today and in the last 40, 50 years than ever before, and therefore the domination that Europe was able to have and that the US was able to have in the first part of the 20th century is, I think, something about the past.
Well, sir, if we look at Europe in, say, the 15th or 16th centuries, one of the reasons that economists attribute to the rise of Europe and their prowess around the world, they ruled the world for about 200, 250 years thereon, is the fact that they were able to harness capital better. They were able to raise debt to finance their expansion, their wars, the whole lot. So is it that we in India could never create these world-class institutions, these macroeconomic and microeconomic institutions that were able to do the same?
Well, you raised a good question. I mean, to what extent, what determines growth? And what determines institutions? Is it the case that you need institutions and that generates growth? Or is it the case that for whatever reason you get growth, then you demand better and better institutions, and you therefore have good institutions?
Chicken and egg.
Yes, and I believe very much so, both in terms of testing this hypothesis as well as heuristic evidence, that it is the latter. That is, you have growth, however that comes about, and then you have good institutions. Let me give you an example with reference to India itself. Between 1950 and 1980, and this is something that was discussed this morning, and I'm sure will be discussed over the next 3 days, and I'm sure in the last 10 regulatory seminars that we've had over the last decade, this was discussed, that by any measure, India between 1950 and 1980 had much better institutions than India between 1980 and 2010. As Sohail Seth rightly said, that basically, there isn't a good institution left in India, and that Indira Gandhi, if you will, started the rot. And I completely agree. Now, let's look at economic progress in India between 1950 and 1980, when we had very, very good institutions, and between 1980 and 2010, when we have very, very rotten institutions. What you learn from this is that it's not a chicken and egg. You need to improve, and then institutions are a very income elastic good. If I can phrase it crudely, it's like a BMW. When you have a BMW, you will not become rich. When you become rich, you ask for and have a BMW. Good institutions are the same way. So therefore, I disagree with people who say, look, we should have the institutions like Scandinavia does. We will have it, but we are 1/10 the per capita income level, if not 1/15. So therefore, this will come with time. We are, because of globalization and because of the extreme internet and awareness, which I think has a real positive influence on growth and development, we somehow think we should be where the other countries are today. But that is a long historical process, and we forget development and growth is a long historical process. I think what China and India have shown, that historical process of growth can be collapsed. I mean, India has grown at a per capita income of close to 5% for 30 years. So I think, which has never before been seen in history by any country except for China, which has done it at 7% or 7.5% a year. So what we have witnessed in the last 30 years is truly, truly revolutionary. We have collapsed the process, and therefore I think we will also collapse the good institutions process over the next decade or two, but it's not there yet.
Well, so that raises one fundamental question. If we are growing at a steady clip, a clip that we have not seen in the past few years, and we are doing better than before, why is it not that we are having inclusive growth? And why is that still a problem? Why is this allegation around always that there is an increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots?
Because that is the political sloganeering that certain political parties feel that they have to do. Maybe all of them feel. I call it in the name of the poor politics. Inclusive growth is nothing more than I want to help the poor. And that was what Indira Gandhi said in 1971 when she said Garibi Hatao. Right. So what's so different about inclusive growth and Garibi Hatao? Nothing. Indeed, things have gotten worse as far as what the government is doing to help inclusive growth. But what the private sector, what individuals themselves, through their aspirations are doing, are improving their lot. So I think, to assert that there's less inclusive growth now than before is erroneous. It may make for good political slogans, but it is just plain wrong. You just ask anybody, whether poor or not poor. I mean, when you look around, the people are less poor than they were before, but they are still massively poor. So are we talking about an absolute level, or are we talking about change? Inclusive growth, by the very definition that you say growth, right, it's change. Right. It's not a level. Right. And in terms of growth, there is more growth now for the poor than there ever was when Indira Gandhi started her Garibi Hatao.